Okay, well, welcome board members to our March meeting of the League of Cities and Towns Board. I am going to kick us off while Mayor Kaufusi navigates the traffic of I-15. And we'll just do a few of these administrative items while we're awaiting her arrival. So our first order of business is to review and approve the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to enjoy and review the minutes?
Is there a video of that?
You know, you can actually look at it via Zoom if you need to.
Oh, I guess you
Yeah,
can.
indeed, and the minutes all have we use the law where you're allowed to just have a link instead of writing it all out. So click on a link, you're right there.
I'll move to approve the minutes as submitted.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great, we got everyone online. Anyone opposed? Our minutes are approved. Next is we have our traditional call for any conflict of interest disclosures. Does anyone have any conflicts to disclose? I have one I want to remind you of that relates to myself. It appears on my conflict of interest form, but in my day job, I do represent the Intermountain Power Agency, IPA, as their lobbyist. So that'll probably become relevant later on. And so I want to just make sure everyone is reminded of that and the staff is already aware.
This would probably be a good year for that to be a conflict for us, right?
It's been a fun one. It's also, my city is also a member of one of the 23 cities. So luckily it's all aligned from that perspective. If nobody else has any conflicts to disclose, we will move on from that. And I think now we're moving on to Liam for boards and commissions.
I get to sit at the table for 60 seconds.
Welcome. Thank you.
Feels really nice. So we've got a few boards and commissions to go over. The first one we will be taking some applications for. That's the Utah Communications Authority Board. Just as a quick reminder, I put a little blurb in there about what it does, but it provides some radio services and NG 911 network services, along with training and cooperation between federal, state, local governments on these communications. This was previously held by Gary Watcott prior to his passing at the end of January. The other appointment that we have right now is Sean Guzman in St. George. So we're looking to fill one of those two appointments there. I don't know if you have anything else to add about UCA.
I have a question when I read this. Does it need to be somebody who's like in a police department, or does that matter?
It doesn't have to be, but it is useful. If they have some kind of either background or tie to public safety.
Yeah, which is why, when we had Gary, it was a good fit. Obviously, this prior public safety service, so it'd be great to fill with somebody like that. So if you have any ideas on that, or if you're interested, you can just let me know, send me an email. We're gonna try and get that filled by the April board meeting. So beginning of April, it's a deadline on that would be great. Then we have a couple with recommendations to be filled. The first one is the State Records Committee. Nancy Dean, the Clearfield City Recorder, is our current appointment on there. Her term is expiring soon. The State Records Committee staff reached out to us and told us how great of a job that she was doing, and recommended that we see if she wants to be serving there. We reached out to her and she confirmed her willingness to continue serving. So that will be our staff recommendation to reappoint her there. And then
Can I add one thing here? The State Records Committee 8 years ago did not have a city representative on it. We advocated to get this position on it, and then Nancy's been the second municipal clerical reporter that we've had on, and she's been terrific. So this one's really important, even though we are a minority of voices on this records committee. So many of our cities face appeals up to the records committee that it's important to have that municipal voice. And it was one of the first bills that I worked on at the league, was trying to get a spot for us on this records committee. So it's a big time commitment. So Mayor Shepherd, thank you for Clearfield sharing her time and resources to be on there the last 4 years. And I'm glad she's willing to do it again. She's one of our most tenured commissioners.
Yeah, and like I said, they said that she's awesome there and wanted her to continue serving, so. And then the last one, the Wasatch Front Regional Council Regional Growth Committee, again, put a little blurb in there of what they're working on and what they're doing. Previously, Mayor Hall in Bluffdale was serving there, and she reached out to us and told us that due to some other time constraints, she didn't feel like she had the proper amount of time to fill that role, so she resigned that. And in speaking to WFRC and in staff, they recommended having Mayor Warren Palmer of Harriman take her place there. So our staff recommendation is going to be for him to fill that as well.
I think it'd be great, especially where it's such a high growth area.
You want it
And a
all?
presentation.
Do you need,
I think
we want that
we-
now?
Yeah, I think the staff's looking for a motion to, recommend, or actually to appoint, both Nancy Dean and Mayor Palmer.
So we got two, the one is still open then,
The
right?
one is a request for applications.
Yeah.
Correct. And I do believe the State Records Committee is a recommend and Wasatch Front is an appointment.
Right, yep, that's a good point. The State Records Committee has to still be, go through the Senate and the governor, so.
Okay, would anyone like to make either two separate motions or one awesome combo
I'll
motion?
make a motion to appoint the two individuals that have been recommended.
Okay, we have a motion to recommend Nancy Dean and appoint Mayor Palmer. Do we have a
I
second?
second that.
Right, motion second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Looks like it carries unanimously.
It's been a pleasure up here.
You can stay, I mean, there's, it's like we're trying to kick you out.
I mean, it's kind of lonely right over here.
No, I'm lonely.
All right, well,
There you go.
the Ides of March are lonely. Now we're moving on to our budget discussion. So Nick, we'll kick this over to you.
Great, thank you. Just want to give you our, what we call Q2 plus budget report. That is about 2/3 through the year. It's exactly 2/3 through the year. A reminder, as you look through the memo that I should probably put on, that when I talk about percentages in this, we're X amount received, X amount expended, we're talking about our core budget, which excludes the $1.58 million appropriation from the state to run the local administrative advisor program. That's just so you can have a better handle on what we're actually doing, and that program just kind of runs by itself. So just a reminder there. Membership dues, we are just over 100% collected. That doesn't mean we have over 100% membership. It means we budgeted for 99% membership, and we are just under. We have two folks who have told us they do not plan to join. A small town and newly incorporated. Lake Point is a town.
Yes.
Or they're a fifth class city.
Or they're fifth class, yeah.
Yeah, and then,
Just incorporated, so we're trying to work that out with them.
yeah, we're working that out with them. And then one more that we're still, another small town we are still trying to get a hold of. Our sponsor and donation revenue, it's about 10% of our annual budget, and that is right on track. The invoices and agreements went out in January, and we've had a couple, Katie runs this program, we have a couple who have decided not to sponsor this year, a couple more who have decided to come on, so we're looking very status quo there. Registration fees are about 14% of our budget, and we, as I mentioned in our Q1 report, we are lower than expected from the annual convention, which will reverberate through the rest of the year. We do expect to collect about 90% of what we budgeted after mid-year. And we've made those adjustments in our expenses at annual, so that shouldn't have an impact on how much we're going to spend at mid-year. Those are tied, how many people come and how much we spend. But our exhibit space revenue is actually higher than expected. We've already collected 107% of that amount, and we should be seeing some more come in this month for mid-year. Grants and special projects outside of the LAA state appropriation. We've recognized about 18% of that in this period, and this period, I should mention, it says in here, is through February. That is money that we've already received with the Your Land, Your Plan grant, and then as we spend it, that's when we recognize it. So those are tied as well. We should get to 100% expending that grant by the end of this year. Here we have an explanation of the local administrative advisor grant. This is the same as it was in the Q1 report, but just explaining this is a $1.5 million grant that is almost entirely passed through. We do have to the various AOGs to hire a local administrative advisor in each of their regions. One region has more cities, so they have two. And then we are able to have 2 FTEs in-house to help coordinate and run that program. Liam has been running that, and also Gary Watcott was the program director over that. Now that the session is over, we're going to be seeing how to fill that role. But just an update on that grant as well. Expenditure wise, we are looking very good. We're 2/3 through the year, and personnel services, which account for just under half of our total budget, we are at 64%, so just under where we are for the year. Events make up just over a quarter of our budgeted expenditures, and we're just over 71% in that category. That is right on track because we just need to finish up mid-year and then a couple regional events that we're doing. Mid-year doesn't cost as much as annual, so we're right on track there. And as I mentioned in the expenditures for grants and special projects, it's tied directly to the revenue we've already received and we'll be recognizing as we spend. Overall, the budget is in great shape. We are about 1.28 million revenue over expense, and we are looking good. I also have included the numbers, and you can see a breakdown of that there. I've also included October through February check register for you to approve. This is brought each time we sign checks with Mayor Hales, our treasurer. He also reviews and signs this, and we bring that to you for your approval. We have all of the documentation there in Angela's office that we can pull out if you have any questions about any specific expenses here. That is the end of my presentation, and we would welcome a motion to approve both the Q2 Plus budget report and check register.
So moved.
Motion and a second to approve. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Mayor Walker, now that you are here as the first VP, do you want to take over chairing this meeting? Okay. Well, I'll continue on then. Next up on our agenda is our engagement update from Molly. Are we not going there next?
No, we are.
Okay.
Can I just jump in here
Yes.
real quick, Madam Chair? And I didn't get a chance to do this at the beginning, but welcome to our first board meeting after the legislative session. The sun always shines brighter, the air is a little bit cleaner. League staff's been able to renew acquaintances with friends and loved ones. In fact, I have a picture. It's not in the packet. Maybe it should have been. But for those of you who are in the room, there's a picture that my daughter drew that says "Happy End of the Session," and it's her and me. She drew an interlocking U's for the University of Utah because she was very excited to be able to go to a Utah basketball game the day after the session. So we survived, and actually I think we thrived this past legislative session. And what we hope to accomplish over the next hour and a half and the remainder of this board meeting is to really start setting the stage for interim. As terrible of a statement as that is to say in the middle of March. The first piece is on the.
I'm not ready. I don't want to do that.
Well, we're not setting the priorities today, but we do want your candid feedback about the session when we get to the advocacy piece. We want to talk about a couple of bills, in particular, one that did not pass, the fee bill, and why. And then also wanted to bring the full board up to speed on the veto request we submitted last week and why, and talk about next steps there. Before we get to the advocacy piece, we were discussing as staff that whenever we put anything after advocacy, we never have time for it. So as a result, engagement is above advocacy to make sure we have time to discuss engagement. And that's around the next steps in the Dignity Index and Disagree Better. And several of us were at the National League of Cities last week in Washington, DC. And I met with the State League directors from around the country and asked several of them what, if anything, they were doing in this general space. And what was interesting is quite a few directors said, oh, we are aware of your governor's initiative. So they were aware of it. And I said, okay, is it catching on? What are you doing? And their response back to me is like, it's one thing to talk about it, but how are you guys actually implementing it? So we have a code of conduct for consideration today, but this is a conversation we want to have with you of like, what would be helpful for you and your colleagues beyond the code of conduct? And Molly can talk about some of the outreach we've been doing to prepare for that. But it's neat to know that around the country, people are looking at Utah to say, okay, what does this really mean? And what is actually tangible about that? So we're going to do engagement here for a few minutes, and then we'll come back to advocacy to have the discussion about what happened and what comes next. So Molly, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. So, as you know, we've been working on this initiative or kind of complementary initiative of Dignity Index and Disagree Better for a while now. Last year, we had Tim Shriver come present at mid-year, which was very well received. We had the governor come speak about Disagree Better at annual and at local officials day. At annual last year, membership adopted the resolution for Disagree Better and Dignity Index. And then this January, we did an event with Disagree Better up in Cache County, with the Cache County mayors, some of their council members, I believe a few of their youth council members, which went really well. As Cam mentioned, a lot of these groups are having a bit of a sticking point as we look at, this is a great concept and something that conceptually everyone can agree to, but it is really difficult to actually implement. And a lot of that is because it is implemented, you know, face to face and in these kind of daily conversations, and not necessarily in a, I attended a workshop and now everything is better necessarily. So directions that we've received, or updates rather, that we've received from the governor's office, is that they are now contracting and recommending other folks partner with some other organizations that are in this space that are really working on conflict resolution, on disagreeing better, and a lot of these concepts. So there are 4 that their office is recommending folks align with. One is Interfaith America, that is run by Eboo Patel, and they are currently, he is currently the University of Utah's Impact Scholar for the year. There's another organization called Moral Courage, run by Irshan Manji, and she was up here last fall speaking with the governor up at USU on a forum on conflict resolution. There's the Constructive Dialogue Institute, which is run out of NYU, and they were actually contracted to do a 3-part series of workshops with the governor's cabinet, one on healthy disagreement, one on listening skills, and one on conflict resolution. And folks involved with that are Jonathan Haidt is really involved with that. I don't know if folks are familiar with him. He does a lot of social psychology research, has a lot of books out there on this topic that I'm a fan of, just to editorialize. And then Braver Angels, and they had one of their founders, Bill Doherty, as a speaker at the NLC City Summit last year in Atlanta, and some staff were able to see him speak. So that is where the governor's office is right now with the Disagree Better initiative. In our latest conversations with Dignity Index, we've shared with them that we were looking at kind of having these codes of conduct adopted by the league or potentially by other cities based on the resolution. With Session, we haven't really gotten there yet, but Dignity Index right now is kind of looking to us to see what we're doing at the local level. So that is where we are kind of with background. So with that, there are 2 documents in your packet. One, let's start with that one. We wanted to create a bit of a resource guide for cities and councils looking into adopting some sort of code of conduct or resolution surrounding civility, conflict resolution, disagreeing about it. So this first document is really meant just to be a bit of a resource that we can have on our website as folks are looking to see if this is something that makes sense in their communities. That provides just more scaffolding of kind of, this is the process through which you can go to adopt something. These are some of the things that you should consider including. Some of them are federally required, right? Like that you need to be following. But others are, more kind of best practices that you can look at. So we wanted to present that all to you first as an update on what we have been working on. Yes, and if you just scroll down a little more, so, right, so respect for communications, viewpoint diversity, transparency and accountability, right? So we put notes in like, you need to comply with federal and state transparency laws regardless of whether or not you adopt a code of conduct. But these are just some of the components that we were looking at that could be included. It's not exhaustive. Obviously what works for different communities they're looking to, but this was just meant to serve as a bit of a jumping off point for folks as they're looking at what might make sense in their communities. Are there any questions or concerns about that first one?
What was Jonathan's last name that you?
Jonathan Haidt,
Haidt.
Haidt.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Paul, are you gonna send these names out to us or in some
Yeah, I'm happy to
communication
follow
with
up.
Noel
Yeah,
and
I'm happy
Friday
to
for
follow up with these names out for everyone.
Great.
Sure, yeah. So that is the first one. So we would like just to have that on our website as a resource for folks and then promote that in Friday Facts and other things, just letting people know that if you are interested in adopting a code of conduct, but don't necessarily know where to start, there's things here. It also links to cities and other leagues that have adopted similar resolutions. If your city has done one or does adopt one and would like it to be included, that's great. I think it would be amazing to have a bit of a resource library so folks can see what other cities are doing and thinking of and what may or may not work for them and adapt it to their best use. So if,
Councilmember.
Markovich has
Oh.
a comment online.
oh, excellent. Go ahead.
Yes,
Thank you. I just wanted you to know, I think this is a great way for us to lead. Actually, the nation. I've been sitting on a panel with the Dignity Index for quite a few months now, a national panel, and have had the opportunity to engage with them and with leaders from throughout the nation on this concept. And I think we really have a great opportunity here. I actually was able to fly into, I didn't get to join you in DC at the beginning of the week because I was flown to Idaho to give a speech at their capital on, the topic was Healing America with Dignity and Respect, and talking about this very issue and what we can do. I then flew to DC on Wednesday, missed all of you, and just got home late last night, but had the opportunity to talk to other individuals. I sit on another national board, and I was able to talk with quite a few people who brought up and staffers who brought up the governor's initiative and kept asking me, what is your state doing? What is your state doing? And I think with this, as cities and towns, although it looks like it's a partisan issue nationally, we have a great ability to come in and showcase how do you implement this, and is it possible? Yes, it is. And how it starts with individual people. So I am excited that we have this ability to showcase our cities and then maybe showcase it on a national level as well. And I am more than happy to help in that.
Excellent.
anything else, Molly?
So if we want to jump on, so with all that in mind, we felt that it would be important for the lead board to adopt a similar code of conduct if we are asking our members to consider this. This is something that we drafted as staff that was sent out to you. If you want to vote on it and adopt it today, that's great. What we would like to have something adopted at least by our board meeting in April, so that we have that set for the mid-year conference. It outlined, I don't know if it's more helpful if we go through it line by line. If folks want to read it on the screen, what would you prefer? Or if folks have already read it, we can do whatever, but it outlines essentially ethical behavior and conflict of interest, executing your duties as a board member and municipal representative with fidelity and integrity, avoid all actions which could damage the reputation of the league, abide by the laws of the U.S., the state, and your respective local governments, act with high standards of ethical behavior, dignity, and decency, disclose any actual or potential conflicts of interest and abstain from voting on that action if it would be solely for personal gain or not in the interest of the league. Present ethical behavior for sexual harassment, be fully informed and understand the type of conduct that is defined as sexual harassment under federal and civil law, and not engage in or tolerate any form of sexual harassment. For discrimination, not discriminate on the basis of any of the protected classes federally outlined, and support policies and practices that ensure equal opportunity for all members in accordance with federal and state law. For collaboration and coordination, we will disagree better, listen intently, and work collaboratively with fellow board members, staff, and members. Value and respect diverse individuals and perspectives to foster constructive dialogue, actively participate in board meetings, committees, and other activities, and contributing to our respective individual expertise and insights. Communicate openly, honestly, and respectfully. Take personal accountability for our actions, decisions, acknowledging both successes and failures, comply with all legal and regulatory requirements applicable to our role as board members, and then implementation and reporting. One note here is that we are working, and Nick, you can kind of jump in, fill in the blanks here, but we are working on kind of updating our overall policies of actual kind of brass tacks within some of these things. So this is more of a value kind of proposition right now. It does not consider, you know, the policies, if someone were to be violating this, what the actual, if board removal were necessary or anything like that. This doesn't outline any policy or procedures surrounding that right now. We will be looking at reviewing all of the league's policies and procedures this spring. So this is more of kind of a value proposition rather than any actual kind of policy change.
Thank you for that last part, 'cause I was curious about.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other ball of wax.
That is a whole, yeah, that is a whole other barrel of monkeys, and we will need to tackle that, but we are not tackling that with this right now.
It is a big ball of wax / barrel of monkeys. That's why we're putting the time necessary to review this. We are going to be bringing on former league staffer on a contract basis, Carrie Nakamura, who has a lot of experience in setting up policies and procedures to review ours. Then this, we're talking about our accounting policies and procedures and our personnel policy and procedures, that large internal document that we have, just to make sure that we're as efficient and streamlined as possible and that we're up with the times on stuff like this. So we will be doing that. We hope to have that completed by the end of the fiscal year, but we'll be working that in the spring and summer.
So with that, if there's any provisions that you would like to see in here, anything you'd like to see tweaked, we'd love that feedback. Again, if you would like, if you're comfortable with this meeting and want to adopt it, that's great. If you want to have time to review it, get some edits in, that's also great, and we can look at adoption in April.
And we also have a hand raised.
This is Logan. Mayor Monson, I guess, is my title here now. But more just a comment than a question, I guess. But I support this, and I think it's very important for us to lead out on this. I think it's something that's kind of been implied that should be done, but maybe is been missed as far as just kind of the political nature of things, I guess. A concern maybe that I have is, how do we address complacency in our residents and in those that we, I guess, are representing in things like this? So I'm seeing a trend in Blanding and probably other places as well. People are getting very complacent in government to the point where they're not getting involved and they're not speaking up for things. How do we address that maybe within this a little bit? Just because I feel like if this is a blanket to help people understand the importance of being civil and disagreeing in ways that are productive, because it's important to do that, how do we promote people to still be involved and not be complacent?
That's a excellent comment and concern, and I think also is a nice segue in a moment to the question we want to ask you all of what resources you need and help you need, and so recognizing that needing that participatory government from your residents is huge and helpful for us to understand. So is that something that maybe we would want like another heading section in here around like participation and collaborative relationships with residents, or?
I don't know if that's part of the code of conduct. I agree with the point he's trying to make there, but I'm not sure if it's really kind of part of the code of conduct, because the code of conduct is for the board of directors and for the league members. I'm thinking of, I think the mayor's point is more on the addressing of the options that you talked about. How do we make that next step?
Yeah.
Right? It's again, okay, we all got trained on it. We wash our hands, we understand it, we're good to go. And then we just continue to march on and, eat the junk food, right? And we don't can follow our diet. And in this case, I think as a city, we've done it too. We've had 3 times with Tim Shriver. But again, it's almost like we've washed our hands and we put it aside. And I think those 3, I think you had 3 options are making that next step. And I think the mayor's point is like, what's that next step? How do you do it in public?
Yeah.
You have the discussions in public, you have the discussions at league meetings, and how do you just kind of like reiterate that point every time you have a function?
And Mayor Monson could potentially be a separate document too.
Right, right, yeah, because that is important, right? The engagement, because we want the residents to see how we're engaging with each other to disagree better, but that's also engaging with them, and then in turn, hopefully they're going to engage with us that way.
Well, and it's also, I feel like it's the perception of how the residents take stuff like this. I mean, this document for sure is for the board, for those that are here and involved with the organization. But as we push this out to our communities and things, what is the perception of the community going to be? Is it going to be that this is here because they don't want us to disagree with them at all? Or is this here because they want us to be engaged and here are the ways to do it, kind of thing? I think it's just a matter of how we approach it. And I for sure agree that this is more addressing what we're going to do moving forward versus this actual document.
Additional thought with.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention, and I think it's important that, as municipal governments, that we set an example for the broader area. And it makes me think, I recently, you try not to throw the stones, but you also try and catch them. And so just this last week, someone was really on social media complaining and name calling an individual that I worked with, and I knew that it wasn't true. And so I was like, okay, I shouldn't say anything. I should just skip past this. But then I was like, this is really bugging me because I know that this individual volunteers so much time and so much work. And so I just said, my experience has been different. I think this individual is great. And then that person started to attack me, and then I'm getting the name calling and I'm like, oh my goodness, I shouldn't have even put anything, but it made me think, like, maybe instead of responding, should I have just reached out to the individual and said, hey, I support you. I know these things aren't true, or maybe give him and his wife a gift card to go out to lunch or something, because I know that they're struggling with the, social media criticism. But I think it is just so interesting, like, because you try and respond kindly and, but I don't know what the answer is, because it is hard with how uncivil people are becoming, and they just feel like we're at social media. And overall, I'm just like, stick to social media, people are so rude and critical, so I'm glad that we're looking at this.
That was actually the path I was gonna go down, and I think Mayor Monson's comments are great. And I wonder if we want to put those, Molly, into our suggested resolutions or policies for others to adopt. That it includes a bullet point about encouraging engagement by our residents. And then I would love to see us try and tackle a specific section on social media, both as a recommendation template for cities to adopt, and for this board, because that is that tricky space of, I remember when Dr. Schreiber, yeah, what came and spoke with us, he had a question about what do you do when you know there's something that he said that is untrue. And if you leave it out there in the public space, then, you know, the untruth grows and it becomes more powerful than the truth. And so I think maybe having his guidance or some of those other organizations you listed on how we do that, because I think we've all encountered that where it's important to correct a false narrative before it gets tons of legs in your community. So you have to disagree, but we have to figure out how to do it better.
Yeah.
And that's the trickiest space. And so I think we do probably need a special section on social media would be my request, both in our league document and in what we would recommend as a template back to our member cities.
Dr. Fisher, you've got Mayor Jessup's hand up.
All right, Mayor Jessup.
Good morning. We were so impressed, myself and some of the staff that attended the ULCT conference and heard Tim Shriver. We work under a DOJ indictment for discrimination in Hilldale. And so we are always looking for ways to disagree better and to be very respectful of one another. And so as a matter of implementing this, we took it back to our staff meeting and went around the table and asked, how is it going for you? Because we had the staff that works with the very difficult situations with utility customers and such. And then I took it into the town council and we had a thorough discussion about it in our town council meeting. Our meetings are Zoomed, and so we got response from the community and they loved it. And so about every 3 months, so we do it quarterly, we go back to that Dignity Index card that was, we ordered a bunch of them for the city. We have them at the front desk for the community to pick up. And we go back, that's kind of our Bible, just because we love it. Yeah. And so for implementing, that's what we have started to do. It's been a full year, but we still comment back. And as for Facebook, you know, there's a lot of things that get slung around. I'm a little bit notorious in my community for saying, don't get in the mud and play with the pigs. And that's what Facebook is. But I ask all of my staff, please refer back to that Dignity Index before you ever respond to anything on Facebook so that we can be that example of how to step up and do better in our community. So I loved the Tim Shriver presentation and I love this initiative and we've gotten behind it 100%.
That's excellent and a really helpful kind of case study for implementation. So just with the couple minutes we have left, I'm just curious as to what those kind of friction points are for you, of like what would be helpful for you. It sounds like, yes, some social media training on something. I guess, is it social media and interpersonal? Is there one that you would prioritize over the other? Or
I think this whole movement has arisen because of social media. I feel like people are, as Taylor Swift has told us,
which is gospel.
Which is gospel. I'm listening now. You know, you say it in a tweet, it's a knockout. But you say it in the street, right? So I don't feel like we have quite the same problems in a face-to-face. I mean, I'm sure all of us have experienced a very heated meetings with our community. Sometimes who's ever chairing needs to remind the audience of our rules of decorum. But for me, that's been a much more rare experience as compared to the daily battles on social media to try and just maintain a good discourse and providing information to counter rumors and things that aren't true and figuring out the proper ways to do that. So, and thank you for allowing me to quote Taylor.
I think what Provo will definitely take it back, but we'll look, we already have a code of conduct and all these things. So it'll be fun to take it back and look at the comparable and do a deeper dive.
Perfect. And if you'll send us your code of conduct, then we can share as well.
That would be great.
I was just going to say, I've been contacted by other rural communities where there is conflict actually within their council. And
No.
What?
Are you? And that?
no,
That was
we're
perfect,
good
yeah.
there, but and some of the other communities have contacted me and said, does the league have some help on how to deal with a council member that is like intent on undermining others and being sort of nasty? And so I think as we look at the guidance or things that would be helpful for city councils and communities, the social media, but also the face-to-face and how you deal with someone who's sort of a rogue council member, perhaps. But looking at this, the Utah League of Cities and Towns Board of Directors Code of Conduct, I wanted to ask, do you get blowback on social media for the league? Because I thought this document addressing the league board code of conduct was pretty sufficient. So, you know, if, from my viewpoint, if we could present this at the league meeting, unless someone has some edits they want to make that they're concerned about now, I thought that would be great to be able to present it.
Yeah, so I can answer this.
I don't experience blowback on social media from my league role. I have experienced it, unfortunately, from
Oh, yeah, yeah, for your city.
some of our other colleagues.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, there are, I mean, you would hope that you could have words with the row council member, you know, but it's not always possible. And there's been a recent example in South Salt Lake about that kind of situation. There are other cities that have experienced that same type of issue where you just can't convince someone to be civil. So, you know, you have to still navigate that when somebody's not going to do it. But a code of conduct is at least a start on that, I think. And if you can get some buy-in on that initially, at least you can point to that.
So,
Sometimes the code of conduct regulates the behavior of the people that would be regulated anyway. And we face the same kind of things in the legal profession with respect to a code of professional responsibility and a code of professionalism. And it, you know, it's always argued that it only regulates the behavior of the good actors, not the bad ones. So that's always a problem. But I think having a base may be helpful overall.
Councilmember, I appreciate you asking the question because it dovetails into something Mayor Monson said a moment ago. As we, as staff, we're digging into Dignity Index and digging into like, what is our role in trying to help our members? I think it was always implied that we had a code of conduct here for the board and we just never had anything written down. So again, we thought this was a good first step, and then all the research Molly was doing elsewhere then becomes resources for others. In terms of the social media blowback, I mean, we have social media folks who attack the league online, and that's fine. We usually just ignore it or we'll diplomatically try to set the record straight. Where we get the most attention in this space is with those conflicts within cities. Todd Godfrey, Roger, Justin, me, we all field phone calls on a regular basis from city staffers who are trying to navigate it, or from competing sides of the council. And we represent the city, right? So we try not to take sides or even have a value judgment of this person is rogue and this person is right. It's more clearly you have a conflict in your city. So what can we do as the third party to help you overcome that conflict you have in the city? So I'm glad that other communities are reaching out to you, because this is the sort of feedback we want as we're working through the budget for next year and the next steps here. What resources could help those communities, whether that's trainings, conflict resolution, seminars, whatever it is, what techniques can we help provide so that the council members that are at odds with each other, and the city manager, the city clerks who's trying to navigate it, can try to work together.
and I guess that's my follow-up question of, it's helpful to know, like, there's the social media, there's the interpersonal, but then from your experience, and then also just the other cities you're interacting with, is the tension more, you know, within the city, right? City staff, council division, those kind of
In-house, or is it
in-house, or is it the citizens? And how would you like to see us prioritize that, recognizing we probably need to do something on social media, we probably need to do something interpersonal as like 2 separate lanes, but then how would you kind of prioritize where that biggest tension is that needs to be addressed? In my mind, it kind of makes sense to address what's in your house before you start to engage with the public, but also this might be a flood, flood plain one, build it situation as well.
Molly, what if we, for the conference coming up, what if we have some training classes that are part of the agenda that you can go to? I mean, I know workshops, yeah, I would love to attend one.
So like dispute resolution.
Yeah, dispute resolution workshops down at the convention.
I don't know how you train the residents.
We find out all the answers that are hurting cats.
I do. I'm gonna give them this form and have them sign it. If they don't do it, I'm gonna kick them off of social media.
Okay. Let us know how that goes.
Yeah, exactly. Kick them out of the city, you could also just have.
So there you go. Thank you.
So Mayor Kafusi, one conversation we've had, and I see Councilor Malkovich has her hand up, but we have our 2 conferences a year, and then this year, as a reminder to the board, we're doing regional trainings with all of the AOGs. And historically, our trainings have been more in the legal lane, the legal and policy lane. Conflict resolution is slightly outside of our lane, but we see a big need there. So we're trying to figure that out. And it really is an in-person type conversation. I think it's hard to do any sort of conflict resolution training via a screen. So we've been trying to figure out, is this something you do at the conferences, or is this maybe a standalone type training where we partner with the universities to come up with an elected official specific conflict resolution type course? And I was talking to the governor's office this morning on this very topic, and they said that they just reached out to the universities, encouraging them to come up with some broader training in this space. So there may be some synergy there that we could have as part of conferences, but maybe something that's in addition to conferences that maybe isn't for all 1,500 mayors and council members at once, but we kind of try to build out some curriculum there. But obviously that's a big bandwidth piece, big financial commitment piece, and that's why we want to have a discussion today. So as we're working through the budget, through the spring, we have the general direction from the board.
But I don't think anyone's ever gonna complain about being overtrained or
In this space.
in this space, because it's such a hard space to be in right now. I would love to listen to lectures about it, and just even if the takeaways are small and then you get more point specific later on, I think it's a hot topic and it's worth having workshops for people to attend. I mean, no one's gonna complain to be overtrained on this one, I don't think.
I don't know what you can pull together for the mid-year conference, but I actually think a workshop on that would a panel doing some role playing or something like that would be super beneficial, because I think there are a lot of, especially even newer council members or mayors that don't have the skill or the experience of trying to deal with that kind of conflict. And we all get it, whether it's a land use application or some more cultural war issue that we're seeing more and more of that come onto our, into our diocese. So I think we could pull a role playing thing together for mid-year, that'd be awesome.
I agree.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by what Mayor Silvestrini said a moment ago about how we're probably, anything we do in the space, we're probably regulating those that are already the good actors. You said it better than that, but I really appreciated that. And so I think a training from the perspective of how do I get that other guy to listen when he's the problem? Because that's what we all think anyway, right? I'm never the
I
problem.
know, I'm the problem sometimes. I know I am. I sit and say, don't say it, Michelle. Don't, just do something, think of something else. And I am the problem sometimes.
I did have a council member say to me, when you hear me stutter, it's because I'm saying something else in my head and I'm holding it back. I'm trying to figure out how to say it out loud. But, our former lead attorney would often say, if everybody out there, I don't know how he said it, but pointing the finger to, you're the problem.
Yeah.
And so looking at it from that angle is always helpful. And if I have tools on how to be civil, not always, but most of the time, when I employ those, it at least lowers the tone a little bit. It doesn't maybe bring it down to where it should be or where we'd all like it to be, but it does always
It helps.
bring it down a little.
Mayor Walker.
I think if we're gonna do this, we need to do a workshop on irony as well, because the irony of this legislature and everybody talking about this disagree better, and example after example of the key bills that mattered to us were not disagree better. It was either this or that, or there was, threatening to take away fundings. You go down the list. I mean, the irony strikes me hard here. I'm astounded that we're working on how to disagree better as an organization with a group that does it however they do it, and, hit the road if you don't like it. So I don't know. Sorry. I hate to bring the negative energy into the room, but I can smell a lot of bullshit here, so I'm just laying it out.
Well, that was gonna be the segue to advocacy.
You have a really sensitive nose for that.
Karen's got her hand up.
Yeah, and we also have a couple of comments I can read out.
Okay, perfect. Why don't you go, Carrie, and then we'll read the comments.
Okay, I would just say I agree with everyone, including Troy. But some of my background is in emergency management in my city role, and I've been doing that for the last 8-9 years. And one of the things that we talk about in emergency management is how do we train in blue skies so that when gray skies come, it's automatic. And I think that's where we find ourselves with dignity and respect. We're kind of finding ourselves in the gray skies and aren't always sure what to do. I think there's a prime opportunity we have, not just for a workshop, but maybe for a series, a respect or dignity series that people could attend, whether it's through Government Trust, whether it's through the League, whether it's through Tammy Pfeiffer and Tim Shriver, but have something in place where you could do a series so that you're not on information overload, but you have that card that Mayor Jessup talked about where you can actually look at it. Maybe some other another class on, instead of using this word, use this word, because that's basically what this index is about, is saying you can get your point across, you can have the hard discussions, you can disagree better, but it's word choices. So maybe we hand out the Dignity Index card on a smaller scale, as well as another card with it that says, instead of using the word I hate you or you suck, use this word instead, and elevate our speech to a place that still gives us empowerment, but doesn't bully. And I think that's what people are looking for in implementation is, how do I actually do this? It sounds good, but we know, like Mayor Walker just said, everything starts with emotion, and emotions do not go to civil thought. And that's why I think if we can train when it's blue skies, when we're not having trouble, then when we're in the heat of the moment, we have something in the back of our brain that just clicks in to say, do this better, be better, still have the passion, but be better.
Okay, Roger.
I was just gonna say,
Sorry.
we have seen the emergence recently, however, not a failure to communicate or differences of opinion, but people being elected with the sole purpose of being the disruptor. And the question of also see political bodies in effect make up disciplinary rules for what they're going to do. I think in some sense there is a dimension of what is permissible, what actions could a political body take in terms of restricting the authority of an elected individual when that person there is not there to work together. They are there to disrupt the meetings. And I think in large measure, we've got to not be naive that has started. What is the legal authority that you have within your bodies to take action? What can you do? And I don't think we've had a particularly robust discussion, even amongst the legal community, of what are the options.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Any other comments online?
We had Councilmember Malkovich mention earlier after Mayor Monson's comments that Logan's comments are in alignment with poll data collected by Frank Lutz and presented at the National Governor's Board meeting in February. Also agreement with Mayor Jessup's comments, maybe hand out the cards at our conference in St. George. And then finally, we had Councilmember Phillips note in Cedar City that our youth council is considering a civility resolution right now on how to be more civil and engaged in community actions. They hope to adopt it soon and then take it to our city council, asking them to endorse such an idea as well.
Thank you.
Excellent. So with that, if there's interest in adopting either of these today, we can do a motion on that. If not, we can revise and adopt.
What we have.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I'll second that. I think this is good. I think this is a good document right now for us, as a league. Yeah. That's so.
So, okay, so we have a motion on the table and a second. Is there any discussion on this? Or if anyone would like to make an amendment to the motion?
I don't want to make an amendment because I think we should move forward, but I do think if the staff came back with at some other point with, if the league wants to have a bullet point or two specific to league social media for board members, that would be appropriate at a later date.
And that, maybe we could, if somebody comes up with a brilliant idea, we could amend it in April if we need to do that, but I support adopting the.
And this is good. Everyone can go back to their cities and look at their own code of conduct and kind of take a look at it, because beauty of it is it's a moving document. It's a living document, so we can amend it every month if we want. So, all right. Seeing no further, any discussion online, are we okay to call it to a vote? Double checking. All right, let's go ahead and call it to a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
All right, the motion carries. Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
Okay, let's move on to item number, need my glasses to read it, 6. The advocacy updates, and this is for staff to.
Yeah, well, this is where Mayor Walker's segues is quite appropriate. Justin, take it away.
So updated session's done. That's the good news. Get our slides up here and then I can talk, but first off, just thanks to all of the engagement, the work, the extra hours, the reaching out. It takes so much more than just, the league staff that's up on the hill to get everything done in the session. So thanks to everyone for your help and all the efforts. It really does make a big impact. But I think, Nick, let's just jump right into the first slide there. So we've got, so we're doing these all throughout the LPC, but just wanted to give you our final update. There were 940 bill files opened this last legislative session. Of those, we tracked 247 bills. So we were tracking 6.3% of all the bills that were opened. Ultimately, 591 bills passed. So just as a little quiz to see who's been paying attention, anyone know what the previous record is? So yes, that was a record. The previous record of bills passed was?
575.
575 is correct. So last year they set the record by 1. They did 575 last year. This year they went to 591. And honestly, it was fascinating for anyone that spent a lot of time up there. Last year, they had a lot less public comment in committee meetings. They kind of flew through things and only hit 575. Also adjourned early last year. This year, they allowed a lot more public comment and yet somehow still got through 591 bills in that 45 days. So pretty amazing amount of bills that were passed. So with that note, let's jump into some of the themes from our perspective that we saw and kind of some of our thoughts about what went on. So our theme of partner sought preemption is working most of the time. We'll talk about this in a minute, but there are a lot of big things that could have happened that didn't happen. There were some things that happened that was a little bit preemptive, but this theme does resonate and it is working well a lot of the time, not all of the time. We're competing with a lot of other groups out there who have a lot of thoughts about how things should go on. Our successful spot is really being viewed as a policy shop. Because of the data and the expertise that we bring, we're able to differentiate ourselves from a lot of the other groups that are up there talking all the time. A lot of the other groups have anecdotes, they have principles, they have ideas, but not necessarily the data or the expertise to come in and say, here's what this bill will do, here's what the implications are. You know, we've got 20 city attorneys who are giving us an opinion on this thing. Really, that data and expertise does set us apart from a lot of the groups. We were able to get a lot of carrots and fewer sticks out there this year. And there has been a lot of recognition, I think, particularly from Speaker Schultz, saying you guys have done a lot of work in a lot of areas in the last few years, and we recognize that. We see what you're doing. So even though they may not always be big, sexy headlines about some of the complex housing things that are being done, the people who are making the decisions do understand a lot of the work we are being done. Again, going back to us being a policy shop, and a lot of our arguments are nuanced and expert, and that does get recognized. Even again, they're not necessarily the easiest headlines sometimes. And this year in particular, jumping to number 2 here, the state doesn't have a surplus, and neither do we. Resonated really well. Last year, if you remember, we had a lot of discussions about all of the aggregate fiscal impacts of all the bills that were out there. This year, we did not have to track that as closely because there were not as many bills that just have unfunded mandates down on cities. So we would go to legislators and say, hey, if you do this, it is going to cost this much. And bills got changed just off of that comment. They understood that they didn't have the surplus, we didn't have one either, and that was very effective this year. Let's jump to our next one. This is maybe to me, my biggest takeaway. There's other important ones, but this is one that hit me really hard this year. It is getting harder to kill bills. It is just getting very, very difficult to kill bills. And didn't put all of them up here, but we got several thoughts on this. So one, again, record number of bills passed here. But in previous years, you would see them kind of, and we'll talk about the religion bills are a great example on this one, Jared's favorite bills that we made it work on. But there were 3 very similar but very disparate bills in the space of religion and conscience. In a lot of previous years, you would have seen someone kind of merge all those together or say, I'm going to be the deal maker and we're going to work through all of these. But they let 3 very disparate ideas go through. Even though they overlap, they contradict. There's not even coordinating clauses on some of them, which I do not understand from a drafting perspective how that is possible. But they're really letting a lot of stuff move forward. You're seeing just sort of a, well, my colleague's got this idea, I'm going to let it move forward. One of the things that we said is there's not really bad bills, there's just bad language, is what we're hearing from a lot of people. And we're seeing this in committee meetings. SB 91 is another really good example of this one, where we were able to hold a bill in committee 2 times. And for the record, holding a bill in committee 2 times is quite an accomplishment. I'm putting that on my plaque of accomplishments, but holding a bill in committee 2 times is quite an accomplishment, and it still passed out. That's weird. That is unusual. This is a new trend that we started seeing that we haven't seen in previous years. Usually if a bill got held in committee twice, that thing wasn't going anywhere. And the sponsor got the message that we've held this in committee twice, it's not going anywhere. But there was just a lot of deference to legislators' bills this year. Like, if you're willing to work on this, we're willing to see it again. If you're willing to sub it, we're willing to go again.
We need to give so-and-so a win.
Yes.
That was amazing.
That was amazing.
Since like participation trophies.
No, but
Like my generation, I didn't know we did that for boomers.
But very much that is something that we're seeing. And if you're willing to work on a bill, then they're going to hear it again. HB 13 is another example of this one. This is the IDS bill, the infrastructure financing districts. It went through iteration after iteration after iteration. And so long as people were still at the table talking, they're willing to move stuff forward. And it became also very clear that if you didn't want to be at the table talking, they were going to move it forward anyway. It was just whether or not your choice was to see if we could make this bill better. Again, going to the religion bills, these things were going to move. It was a question of, could we make them better? So strategically, this is something we need to keep in mind. This legislature, and we'll see, if this changes, but I don't think it probably will with the elections this year. It's getting harder and harder to kill bills. So we've got to make sure that we're at the table getting bills to the best place they can be. But for our members, and they're like, well, why didn't you just kill it? That is becoming a harder option to take. Yeah, Mayor.
So Justin, I'm just wondering if, some of this participation trophy viewpoint was because this was an election year and members are trying to protect other members in the body. You think maybe that won't be as big of a factor if it's not an election year?
That's a good question. The election years versus non-election years are always a little bit different. That being said, we've been seeing this trend this way the last couple of years, election year or not. There's something with the character of the current, particularly class of freshmen. There was a lot of them last year, as you remember. There's a huge turnover. There's very much just a different tenor up there. And I don't think it's as much to do with elections as we're gonna let you work through stuff as long as you can.
Was it anything to do with they had to announce their candidacy before the cycle?
And that's a good question because that certainly changes things. We'll see long-term the difference that makes, yeah. Let's see what that looks like, but certainly that definitely changes it. But it'd be interesting because there were bills where I mean, the sponsor would have many bills. And then for whatever reason, this bill just keeps moving forward regardless of election or not, or other people's bills who historically just sort of went away. And I'm not going to name names, but some legislators whose bills people are like, yeah, whatever, kill it. Nope, you keep working on it. We'll look at it again. Stuff just did not go away this year. The other thing in this, it's getting hard to kill bills, and this is sort of an internal discussion that we need to have. And we don't have to have it all today, but we're seeing rogue bodies, or sometimes just rogue city people speaking for cities. So we found out we had the city treasurers have an association, and they were coming out with some positions on bills that surprised us because they were very different from some of our takes on bills. The code enforcement folks were very much in favor of some bills that we were very much against, we found out. And Jared Carson went to the meetings and explained to them why that was a bad idea. But the other thing we're hearing from a lot of legislators, and again, some deference is being given to this, and it puts us in a strange place, is someone will say, well, I spoke to my city. Now, that could have been one of you, it could have been a mayor, it could have been a council member, but sometimes it was a guy who works in the Parks Department. And they say, well, I spoke to my city about this. And if they spoke to one city, then they spoke to all their cities. Or they spoke to, again, we spoke about this later, kind of that one row council member, they spoke to them. And so we spend, more time, I feel like this year chasing down, I spoke to my city, and us having to figure out who they spoke to and why that was such a different comment than we were getting. So we need to have some discussions over the interim about how do we make sure we're unified and that the water's getting to the end of the row so that, the finance officer, HR person, whoever it is, doesn't go and undercut some of the work that we're doing. There was nothing, egregious or horrible, but there were some that we had to clean up a little bit here. And the other takeaway, and it's hard to kill bills on this one, is blunt force action still works. But so the action alerts, they still work, but they aren't working as much to kill the bills. Again, when we do an action alert, gravel pits is a great example of this one. One of the better strategic moves is as soon as the gravel pit bill was going to go to caucus, this is 172. Before it even went to caucus, we sent out an action alert and everybody heard about it, and the bill never even made out of caucus. That was very effective. That worked really well. That being said, we're still going to have to go to the table over the summer and talk about gravel pits because it is getting harder to kill this stuff, not just during session, but in the long term.
And into that point, 172 stayed alive. It came back like 2 days before the end of the session, and we spent a lot of time almost hammering it out to where we could live with it. But
we were close, yeah.
But that was a good example of how that one should have been gone and away.
We actually thought it was good, right?
Yes, and then
it's because
it was still lingering.
And it's only popped up. Oh, yeah.
But I think, Evan, in negotiating on 502, and we gave an offering to study the interim, and actually that's something that should have been done before now. It was planned to be done before now, and it never happened. So,
But we did that on 172, and then the off ramp turned into an on ramp.
I know, but ultimately though, in terms of why that didn't move, is that there was the off ramp that that this was going to study and all that. And on that subject, our work is not done on that.
No.
Because the way that bill is worded, it doesn't necessarily say 502, it doesn't necessarily say that there's a committee. It says that Ogden is going to consult with, I think. And if they do that individually, we need to be in a room where we talk about these things so we can share ideas on it and not let them, not let us be manipulated by, oh, I spoke to this city or that city. We may not even know who that is. So I don't know what kind of leverage we have on that, but I'm thinking that the league needs to be more involved and advocate for early formation of a committee.
Yeah, and I think, I agree, and I think that is what, I anticipate that is what is actually going to happen. Talking to Joel Ferry and talking to Dogum, I think that is the route they're planning, right now, just actually getting a group together. And then that being said, it's getting harder to kill bills, but this is all the things that, sorry, on that side, one more time. I said, we put less text on the slides, I actually talked about some, but that said, here's what did not happen because of advocacy. So state preemption of local residential zoning, that one went away. State preemption of zoning for gravel pits, have to work on it, but it didn't happen this session. Home builders hiring their own inspectors, we were able to shoot that thing down. Reduction of local government fee authority, restriction of other revenues, etc. These are things that did not happen, that all very much were on the table when the session
Another
started.
one, which is the uniform rules for stormwater and that kind of permitting.
Well, yeah, good segue, because now go to the next slide.
Now, don't worry, yep.
Yeah, so, where we start in the land use space, we're a potential state senator, stormwater there, but yeah, that was all on the table as of early January. You remember as a board, we met, and Seth, you talked about how painful that board meeting was, the local officials day. We were talking about stretching, and it was not just stretching, it was full on pulling muscles. And the direction you gave us that meeting collectively was go figure out a rumbling number 5 that was different from all of that. And that's ultimately where we ended up in the land use space. And that, I think that is an important accomplishment this session that we need to make sure our members understand.
How much of that do we attribute to the speaker having a challenger? Because he's running horribly scared right now. I mean, he's never had to run a campaign, much less do anything else. And he's got a serious challenger at this point. And he flat out told, on the realtor side, back off. We're not pushing anything forward that will, that would do this to cities because it will backfire on him.
So a couple of quick thoughts on that. I think the election year politics applied to lots of people, the speaker being one of them. But I think it's actually bigger than that, because the league officers met with the speaker months before the filing period and everything else. And in that meeting, the officers can attest to this. The speaker said, I recognize everything cities have done. And I think zoning should be handled at a local level. So even before you had election year related things, there was that acknowledgement from him of all the work we had done in recent years. So I think election year politics were real this year for lots of folks, the governor included. How that's all going to shake out over the next 2 months is going to be fascinating to watch.
We do know that he's going to make Troy's life difficult next year.
That's for
He
sure.
did say that.
One phrase that, going back a few slides, and not that you need to, but going back a few slides, one phrase I think we've heard, I've started to hear from a few more legislators is, we'd like a little bit of time to see if what we've done is going to do anything.
Yes.
That sentiment seems to be growing some legs among some. Not everybody, not as many as we'd like, but I
enough
heard
this
that.
year.
But it is coming up.
I heard that more people this year than ever.
But I think with that, then, with the tools that they gave us this year, which they are going to call tools for us to use, we better use them. Because that'll be the backfire next year.
Agreed.
Is if we come to the table next year and they say, well, we're gonna do this, and we say, well, no, we're working on it. And we have not used the tools. Now, and one of the two, I mean, the fizz is a dang near impossible thing to use, but it's so convoluted, I hated even reading it, but the hops at least is straightforward. And it's 10 acres or less, so it's a lot easier to jump in and use that than it would be the fizz. But I guarantee you from the realtor side, if we use that as our tool, or if we don't use the tools that were given to us, that is going to be held against us for not having done it.
although they've got to bring us projects, the realtors, and
Yes.
developers.
Yes.
And, you know, we're still in a weird,
Financing market.
yes, and so, you know, I mean, if they don't bring us projects to then take some new tools out of our toolbox, like this. I did, your comment, I did want to up that, yes, Speaker Schultz did say that in a fall meeting that we had before he had a challenger, but I've rarely seen him flex so hard on not following anything. I mean, it's one thing to say, I think you've done enough, and I'm gonna scoop the worst off the top. And you can deal with maybe some piddly things, but a full wall, that was. I didn't expect that from his fall meeting. I expected him to take the crappiest stuff off the top and make it disappear and then let some smaller things through. So
Yeah.
it was a different.
Well, and to
full
the
wall.
credit of the speaker, I met with him on a regular basis during the session where he wanted check-ins on the various bills. And I arranged for several meetings with him and the mayors in his area. One of them is new. So he's always been very fair to us as local governments. And in this session, he told the league board or told the league officers in the fall, this is where he was going to be, and he stood firm there. And I think regardless of what happens in the future, I think we need to acknowledge and appreciate that. And then Mayor Shepherd, I think you're right, along with what Seth was saying. We've asked for time to implement things. There are new tools to potentially be implemented. And if we come back in a year or two and say cities really haven't done anything, then we no longer have a good story to tell.
Yeah.
We had a pretty good story to tell this year. We leaned into that story and it resonated. And Carson's going to talk in a moment about the data work we did last summer. That data work helped carry the day. That was very persuasive and then ticked off a lot of folks.
Well, and what we're saying that financing is still tough for the developers. The two tools that they put in there alleviate that.
Yes.
Significantly to where that again will be looked at. We won't be able to say, well, financing's terrible. They didn't bring us any projects.
Do we know that, or do we think that?
No, I actually met with two developers about it and asked them, I said, does this do anything? The Fizz, absolutely not. They didn't have a project that could fit in there, and that's what they do is that realm. They said, of the 10 projects we have going, not one of them would get over a hump because of this bill, nor would it fit. These 10 acres or less, completely, because it's infrastructure. And if they don't have to put the bill for infrastructure, if that's done as a TIF, basically, or CRA, yeah, it totally changes their.
And I think our data collection and cities reporting back when you have a
Yes,
project
yes,
that is
crucial.
proposed.
Is that
crucial.
Dunnigan's bill you're talking
No, he's not talking about the tax increment for the 10 acres or less projects. So it was added to SB 168.
Right.
And actually Carson's going to show in just a second the Slido results. So we did a lot of Slido during LPCs that some of the officers saw. We're going to share some of it here in a second. One thing I just in this section of what didn't happen that is urgent for you to understand, because it's going to be a big issue in the months to come. And Seth is hosting a call tomorrow at the UCMA. So please make sure your city managers are on that call because we're going into more detail about it tomorrow. But Representative Karen Peterson's local government fees bill did not pass. And the reason why it did not pass, even though it got a unanimous approval in House Committee, unanimous approval on the House floor, 71 yea votes, and unanimous approval in the Senate Rev and Tax Committee, which as some of us in this room know, the Senate Rev and Tax Committee is a pretty feisty committee.
I don't approve anything.
Yeah. And yet.
If there's still a committee who will kill bills, it's that one.
And Senate Rev and Tax approved it unanimously. And yet it did not come forward for a vote on the Senate floor. What you have up here are the board principles you adopted last year before we started engaging on the bill. And I've highlighted in red, fee versus tax doesn't impact other revenues. When the bill was during the last week of the session, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints reached out to the Senate to oppose the bill, and they wanted to amend the bill to carve out nonprofits from paying the fee, which if you go down that path of the state carving out certain entities not paying user fees, it opens the door to eroding our entire fee authority.
It isn't a fee anymore.
Blurs the line between fee and tax. Yep, exactly right. So to the immense credit of Speaker Schultz and Representative Karen Peterson, they held the bill in the House and did not send it over to the Senate, so it could not be amended, even though there was some pressure on them to do so. And so again, this is both the Speaker's credit and to Representative Peterson's credit. And we said, yes, we would prefer this bill that we've negotiated. It's been this bill has things in it that are tough for cities because of how difficult we made the process to impose the fee. But it was a negotiated deal. The Taxpayers Association supported it. We supported it. And we said we don't want to undermine this heavily negotiated bill. And to the credit of the Speaker and Representative Peterson, they held it in the House, which means as of today, there is no bill, there is no codified law about transportation utility fees. There's just the court case. Well, from a political perspective, we expect the church and maybe some other entities to push this off season to run a bill to limit our fee authority around nonprofits. We could also potentially see some litigation. So we're going to talk to the city managers tomorrow about recommendations about how to navigate this space, because you have the legal authority to do transportation utility fees. How you exercise that authority this spring is going to be watched very closely in light of the absence of a bill. The last thing I'll note is, even though the session's only been over for 2 weeks, I was contacted by a city last week that said, hey, we saw House Bill 367 didn't pass. We want to do a police fee, because this bill would have precluded a police fee. So they say the legislature didn't do it, so we want to do a police fee.
But isn't that still prohibited by the separate section?
Not really. So my point is, and this will be the conversation with the city managers tomorrow that we'll bring back to the board later this spring. Our concern is if cities start going down the path of doing broadband and public safety fees, even though you have the authority to do so, it undermines what we had negotiated, which then could undermine our ability to hold on the transportation utility fee in future legislative sessions.
And what about all
the other fees from there?
Yeah, the telecommunications and
Yeah.
I'd add one comment to what Cam said. We have the authority to impose a reasonable transportation utility fee. We don't know what reasonable means. That's what the legislation would have done. So if you go ahead and do it, you're still gonna have to come up with a reasonable approach. What that is, we're guessing at. So I add that caveat. We've never had that term, what the specifics mean. There is still a ban on broadband. That's always been. Public safety is a different story. It could be different. But man, if this becomes the wild, wild west, we're gonna lose a lot more than we're gonna gain.
That's exactly right. So please make sure your city managers or equivalents join tomorrow's call, because we'll go into a little more detail with them about all the moving pieces. But I want you as a board to know, since this was a big board priority, what happened to it and why, because it will be a big interim discussion. Okay. So let's finish up with the session.
Yeah, number 4, really quick. And this is not necessarily new, but I guess we saw it more and more this year, as UOC is the tip of the spear on a lot of issues and negotiations. I'll tell the story that this is the bad advice I gave Jared on one of the bills. I told Jared on one of the religion bills, you're probably not going to have to get up and say anything because a lot of people had concerns about this bill. So I expect people to get up. Nobody got up to say anything, even though we had heard from group after group after group that they had concerns with the bill. So Jared had to get up and do it. So still my bad, because I gave Jared bad advice on that one. One day he might forgive me, but that is just one example of dozens and dozens of bills where we have other lobbyists, other organizations really coming up to us and saying, you're working on this bill, right? And we're like, yeah, we're working on this one. They're like, okay, cool. Let us know what you're doing on it. This is happening a lot. So we really are the tip of the spear on dozens of these issues where other people are feeding information back through us. We're speaking opposition from other organizations without doing it. I'll be frank, there's times where I'm like, I want to not do anything on this bill because we're doing so many other people's work, except for the fact that it does impact us. So we do need to do the work on the bill. But this is growing more and more over the last few years, where we really are working these bills for so many groups, for so many negotiations. Stormwater is an interesting example where Representative Musselman called me up and said, I'm hearing from tons and tons of people, you are now the point on this bill, figure it out. Like, it's gonna pass, I have the votes, figure it out, but everybody now runs their comments through you. This happens a lot. So just something that we need to be aware of, that we want to be cautious that we are not expending our political capital beyond the bounds of what impacts us. So it also means sometimes we negotiate on bills, and then other groups come back and say, well, I don't like this. And like, well, you weren't at the table. I don't know what to tell you. This is what we negotiated. But as we talk about political capital and think about this, we need to have this in our minds that we really are the point in a lot of these issues. We're fixing a lot of these things, but we're doing it for a lot of other groups. 185 is another good example where group after group on the building inspectors were just sending us back the feedback. They weren't reaching out to the sponsor to tell them they had concerns. They're telling us about their concerns so we could go and get it done. So I guess on one hand, that's a pretty big compliment. But a lot of our groups come to us and say, we know you can get this done, so please go do it. But also we need to be aware from a political capital perspective that we don't fight too many other groups' wars for them.
And I appreciate the bandwidth concerns, but it is a compliment. It is the fact that our staff especially has the data and that we've been able to marshal and other people calling in when you put a call out so that they hear from cities around the state. So that is, in a way, that it's a good thing too. I don't think, I know it's more work and it's, and you have to kind of be cautious about how you spend the capital, but fundamentally it's the highest confidence.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that, Mayor. And you mentioned data, so I'm going to kick over to Carson to talk about how much the data does matter and what we did with it.
All right, so this will be a pretty quick synopsis, but I want to kind of touch on 2 points. First, I'll just quickly walk through some of the highlights that we used data-wise. We did a lot of research last interim. We'll talk more in future board meetings about this interim's research plan, but just want to hit on these 4 points. First, the 190,000 intelligence number. This was from 66 cities from our housing and land use survey last year. I want to thank UCMA for their partnership as well, because we pushed it out a lot. It was still difficult to get some of these numbers. That's part of the reason that to be added to the moderation housing plan reports going forward. So everybody will just get in the habit of reporting it. It'll give more credibility to the number. But this was a game changer. So thank all of your cities for those of you who participated in that survey. But,
well, and just Carson, I want to just tag on this one. It's always nice when you throw out a data point enough times that the legislators start bringing it back. And so we would hear from other legislators in presentations, well, as we all know, there are 190,000 entitled units out there. Therefore, you know, this thing. So this stuck and probably impacted more legislation than we're even aware of.
And I think we need to not be ever, don't let internal grumbling go, oh, another slide, anything like that. We shoot that down. This is maybe one of the best things we've done in the last decade, and just to keep hyping. All right, we need your input again, and I've loved the change of not showing the results right with action.
I 100% agree with that right there. Yeah, and the other thing, so some of us had the pleasure of going to the Western States Conference at NLC last week, and so Arizona spent a lot of time talking about what they were doing with data. And I was, one of the things, you know, it's always nice when you sit there and like, you know, we check that box, we check that box, we check that box. And actually what we have been doing with data, not only as a league, but also with the Ken Gardner Institute, is like way ahead of what other states are doing. And it is effective, I think. So we need to keep up Slido and keep up the good work on the data.
Awesome. Another point that really stuck that, like Seth mentioned, is the 99% of infections occurring within 3 business days of the date requested. But this was a very quick poll that Seth and I kind of scrapped together in the middle of the session, and he pushed it out to the city managers again. Thanks for doing that, Seth. We got some really good quick feedback, but this was really critical to demonstrating that there wasn't the problem that had been rumored around the state on inspections, and really changed the narrative from all cities are bad actors in the space to the bill, or the House sponsor of the bill, Representative Musselman, saying, we appreciate all the work that cities and inspectors are doing on a daily basis. This is to solve very targeted problems. So that moved the bill a lot. Then the public safety retention report. This has been a multi-year effort, partnership with the Police Chiefs Association, the bill sponsor, Representative Nguyen, and this year the bill actually was revenue neutral on cities. It creates an option for entry reemployment within a year, but again, revenue neutral. And that's a huge change for the past couple of years. This has been one of the bills that's been back every year and has in previous years had a massive fiscal impact for everybody. And then the last one I want to mention is on HB 306, the original version prohibited cities from charging some impact fees while at the same time requiring the minimum density of units per acre, which we did a fiscal impact analysis on this, like many bills, found at $20 to $40 million. That's a pretty conservative estimate, but we provided that back to the bill sponsor and to the fiscal analysts, and they went and revised it down a little bit. But in the next substitute bill, which was never actually heard, but that next substitute pulled that provision out entirely because of that fiscal impact. So even though we didn't have to do a lot of long comprehensive tracking on fiscal notes this year, because as soon as legislators saw some of these big ones, it just disappeared as a substitute. So that was a major change that we saw. I want to quickly touch on Slido since we talked a little bit about that. We started using Slido last year, right before the beginning of the session. I'd say there's been a little bit of a learning curve, but this year we really focused on making sure that our questions were answerable, that they were more meaningful, that everybody understood the terminology. So we did some focus grouping with the online briefing calls beforehand, worked with specific municipal associations to try to make sure we were asking the question the right way. And we saw we actually increased our responses almost each week of the session over last year. And I think we got a lot more meaningful feedback than last year. So I'm trying to keep using Slido. There's two kind of categories, and there's a memo in your packet that provides more detail on this. First is the kind of general member policy feedback. So this is where we don't have a resolution, but it helps say, this is an issue that's a really big problem for me, or maybe this isn't an issue that's a problem for me. That helps those kind of gray areas. The second is political capital prioritization. So understanding not whether something's a problem or not, but what the magnitude of the problem is. So we lead into this tool a lot too. The executive board provides guidance in the lack of board meetings. So being able to provide the executive board with specific feedback and saying this is a major priority for league members was really helpful in more tangible action. I want to just give a couple of examples here. HB 306, again, this is Representative Ward's zoning preemption bill. This started, our Slido, we dipped our toe into the water here with Slidos during the interim, asking about, I think this was Rumbling 1, maybe it was Rumbling 2. So we didn't have an actual bill to vote on yet. We just had these kind of vague concepts, so we brought those. Received a lot of feedback from the LPC during the interim, and the board as well. And then it started to get a little bit, the bill sponsors started to change it in response to our concerns. We brought those through different iterations, and the concern lessened, but was still significant. And then once we actually had a numbers bill, we took it to LPC and they voted to oppose it. But before that could occur, this gave us the guidance we needed to keep negotiating and keep trying to figure out that if the bill moved forward, how do we get it to a place where we can live with it? So really important there. Prioritization, these were the gravel pit bills versus HB 289 as we were nearing the end of the session. These were both still kind of weighing heavily, and we knew that it would be a major fight, and because of sort of the politics up there, it would be disadvantageous to try to just fight head on all three. So we did the Slido polls. We found that HB 289, this is with all the amendments, this is the bill that eventually passed. Only 20% of LPC members felt like this was a high priority to oppose, compared to the gravel pit bills 503 and 172, much higher priorities to oppose. Again, we stopped sharing some of the results intentionally because we didn't want the bias effect where somebody in LPC says, oh, I see that on the board now that everybody doesn't like this, I'm going to change my position on it. We wanted this to really just be sincere.
I think that's a great, I would not stop doing that. I would definitely.
Yep.
That's the same.
And again, and this goes back to our, it's getting harder to kill things. Because it's been harder to kill things, we really do have to figure out, where we're going to put some of the capital. And so if we know we can amend something to a place we can live with it, and it's a 20% high priority, but these other ones are do or die, then that tells us where to spend our time at Badland. So these are very helpful.
The other question I have is, did we get more participation in LPC this year than in prior years? I mean, I'm sure it's because when I shared it was bad, but I think we had more. I think we had
It was
more
awesome.
We, well, I think to Carson's point, we had more people answering the Slidos than we had last year. So we had more input than last year. The number of people online and in the room, I think, was fairly consistent with the last couple of years.
It was a
But
little
the-
higher.
but-
We did look at it last week, it was a little.
A little higher, okay, great.
Yeah.
But the overall feedback, which is probably the most important part, and this is, Slido's been a game changer, because you remember we used to sort of just do some straw polls, like, how does everyone kind of feel about this? Raise your hand. Slido allows us to get a lot more nuance with that and get a lot more usable feedback.
Again, we, still the topics here that we signed out on just this session, this was our more constrained list, but it's been a really critical tool for us, and, we'll keep moving forward with it. If you have additional feedback, I'd love to hear it, after the meeting or anytime in the next, year.
Is there like a little short white paper to give everyone on, go back one slide? Fizz, PIT, all that.
Yeah, it's almost done.
Yeah,
We've been
in
working with the
process.
FRC on all those.
What about the PTIF funding?
Yeah. Because most of our stuff was in Washington DC last
But
week.
that's not a tool necessarily we can employ, that's a developer.
But you do need to know about it, because if a developer comes to Draper and says, we want to access the PTIF money, but the only way we can do that is if the zoning is flexible enough to achieve this, then you need to know how it all works. So all of that will be done by early April. We just lost a lot of staff bandwidth because being in DC.
And when will this interim committee come up on gravel? Is there like a schedule, or is it?
Not yet.
You'll keep us.
Yeah, we'll talk to other folks. Everyone's excited to talk about it, so they'll be coming.
We just need to be proactive about that and to make sure it goes our way.
So, just anything else you want to add just on broad themes?
I think, one quick question. Is there anything we didn't cover that anybody noticed, throughout the session, themes or trends or things you saw that were concerning, things you saw that were surprising in a good way? Just any final thoughts, I guess, from the group on that? Great, if not, then we'll go to 7.
Okay, then let's talk veto. The other key trend is we saw 2 bills this year that are E and F on this list. State authorities that the legislature's created that either are exercising municipal functions or interfering with municipal function. And I referenced this at the last LPC of the session, but this is the Ripper Clause from the Utah State Constitution, Article 6, Section 28. No, Roger did not write the Ripper Clause, but Roger probably knows the Ripper Clause better than anybody in the state. So the legislature shall not delegate to any special commission, private corporation, or association any power to make, supervise, or interfere with any municipal improvement, money, property, or effects, or to perform any municipal functions. They cut out a few words, but that is the constitutional language. So the 7A, the inland port, that original version of the bill very much in our minds violated the Ripper Clause. That's why this board, previous iterations of this board voted to support an amicus brief on behalf of Salt Lake City about the inland port bill. That inland port law has changed substantially since then. So the court disagreed that the current version of the inland port violates the Ripper Clause. That original version, though, I think had a very strong case that it violated the Ripper Clause. With the Fair Park bill, as I mentioned at LPC, you can go to the next slide, Nick. There are 2 resolutions that we as staff were leaning on as we were meeting with the officers about the Fair Park bill and to a degree SB 161. These are the 2 resolutions about preemption and that really are referencing the Ripper Clause. Then in your packet, you have a copy of the veto letter that we sent, and we also included copies of the letters from board cities who submitted veto letters. So we did not submit a veto letter until we had heard directly from cities that were concerned about the potential negative impacts on their cities. So, for example, on the Fair Park bill, the Fair Park/Ballpark bill, Salt Lake had been negotiating on that bill. Salt Lake did not ask for a veto, therefore we did not ask for a veto. But there will still be ongoing discussions that we have indicated to the governor and others that we want to be a part of because of the precedent that's involved in that bill. For SB 161, the ultimate bill that passed was the sixth substitute. The bill creates this state authority that is high municipal representation, and it could negatively impact municipally owned and managed asset, which is IPA, the Intermountain Power Agency, or the Intermountain Power Plant. So that is entirely municipally owned. So if you take out municipal power, which most of our cities don't do their own municipal power, and insert another type of interlocal agreement or another type of asset that you own with other cities, the potential impact of the state passing a bill, creating a district that could come in and interfere with your authority there is really the policy question at stake here. So the ultimate sixth substitute that was passed in the last couple of days of the session. The 23 cities that are owners of IPA ultimately got the yes on the fifth substitute that passed the Senate. And then the sixth substitute was substituted on top of that on the House floor and sent back to the Senate. So that's why we'd never really had a chance to discuss this at LPC, because that the fifth substitute passed, the fifth substitute was acceptable enough. The sixth substitute was not, but again was passed in the closing hours of the session. So you'll see in your packet letters from other board cities like Kaysville, Bountiful, Murray, and Lehigh. We also included Oak Cities. Oak City is not a member of the board, and of course a member of the league. But I thought Mayor Callister's letter was really telling, because most of the cities, most municipalities that own IPA are actually more aligned with Oak City than they are with Lehigh, with all due respect to Mayor Johnson. They're not a big city like Lehigh. There are smaller communities like Oak City. And in this letter from Oak City, Nick, if you'll go down to the second to last paragraph, the second to last paragraph references what the expenses translate to for Oak City. So the mayor indicated that each $1 million of IPA expense translates to over $40,000 of impact on the Oak City budget. To put that in context, Oak City's sales tax revenues last year for the year were $106,000. So for every $1 million worth of IPA, legal, legislative, and other types of expenses, every $1 million of that is the equivalent of 39% of their entire sales tax revenue.
Can I give you just another data point? Legislation that was passed in a prior legislative session delayed the bonding for the new power plant that's being built. And the change in bond conditions, market conditions between when the bonds were going to be let, the power revenue bonds, to when they were let after the legislative session, changed dramatically to the tune of $93 million. So for a city like Oak City, that changes the differentials on that project dramatically because of legislative action.
Well, one other piece on the legislative action, it's referenced in the Kaysville letter and the Bountiful letter, but the concern from the particular cities is that if they are not able to draw on IPP power at certain times, in Kaysville's case, it saved them $270,000 last year, right there, that's perfect. So that first paragraph, Kaysville called it back in 2022, and it saved $270,000 for their residents. So you'll notice our letter does not talk about energy policy, because the crux of the battle at the Capitol is around coal and frankly, things that are outside of our lane as an organization. Where we agreed, as we were getting the letters from our cities and after discussing with the league officers, was the concern about the state creating a district that can come in and interfere with your municipally owned assets. So we thought it was important, knowing we were meeting today as a board, to explain to you the thought process from the officers about why we sent this veto letter a week ago today. The governor has not yet signed the bill. We do anticipate that he'll sign the bill, but part of our pitch to the governor when we submitted this letter last week was there's still a lot of unanswered questions about this bill, as there is with the Fair Park Ballpark bill, about the role of the state and the role of local governments, whether that's in tax policy, land use, or in this case, the interference of contracts. And we need to have real conversations about the precedent of these types of bills with the governor and with other leadership. And the governor was responsive to those concerns and said, I'm kind of regardless of whether he signs the bill or not, he's open to have those conversations. So we wanted to bring it to the board and just get any kind of initial thoughts or questions from the full board about either the veto letter specifically or just the general issue of the creation of these state districts that are stepping in to what heretofore have been traditional municipal authority and are on pretty thin ice when it comes to the RIPER clause.
Kim, let me raise one slight addition to this. The Constitution authorizes interlocal entities to be created between political subdivisions. It grants the legislature authority to set up the mechanisms for those. But the implication is the core issue is the consent of those entities to form the entity. There's not permission from the legislature to form them. And so the question really becomes one of, in some cases, the legislature is just basically saying, well, because we passed legislation that authorizes it, we can do whatever we want. That's an incredibly dangerous position to be taking. I mean, that's in effect saying, well, we wrote the corporate code, therefore we can take over any corporation in the state. And in effect, with the IPA situation, that was the entire argument that the legislature had, because we passed a bill 40 years ago, we can do whatever we want.
But do it better.
But do it better, yeah. So Nick, will you go back to the PowerPoint? Because I have, and they go to the slide that has the resolutions.
It's all the same, Kate.
So thank you, Roger, for that context. The without your consent is an important piece here. That is part of our resolutions. And it actually led us as staff to some pretty hard conversations internally. Gary Hill had frankly, a really impassioned, spot-on speech at the last LPC that led us to some questioning, like, what does this actually mean without their consent? Because I think some cities would argue, like, maybe they would get to yes, but they got to yes because there was no other alternative. It wasn't that they were there because they wanted to be there and they were truly consenting to where it was going. So we wanted to ask the question today, knowing we can't answer the question today, but we wanted to get you thinking about this because this is something as a board, strategy-wise, like this, I think is the one big chink in the armor from this session. And we think this trend is going to continue, and we've got to figure out, like, what is our best spot here as an organization. From a municipal power perspective, I think there are things we could do better coordinating with our municipal power cities. Several board members are municipal power cities, sitting next to one right now. It isn't part of IPA, but it's obviously a big municipal power city.
That's important.
Sure, and I think from a league staff perspective, I think we can do better at coordinating with the municipal power cities. That's a separate issue from this core concept. So are there any questions that anyone wants to ask now, or any ideas you want to bring up now? We really wanted to get this on your radar today for future conversations in April and May, but any thoughts, questions, Councilmember Dugan?
Yeah, so thank you very much for bringing this up, because it is a struggle as a capital city when we have, we have the inland port, we have the Fair Park bill. Remember, you think about the Fair Park bill, and then we have the baseball bill and the hockey bill. The hockey bill, 12 pages long, very simple, very clean. Baseball bill, 120 pages long. Oh my God, just complicated as all hell, right? And that whole preemption, the land use authority overriding everything we're already doing in the city out there, but then the desire for, a Major League Baseball team. And I hold my personal judgment on that, but there's a desire for that across the board here. And then you say this word consent. And, yes, we consent in some respects, but we're consenting because there's a baseball bat behind our head. And, if you don't consent, then you get this. And that's why that's the struggle. And maybe I'm, being too candid on some of the conversation here, but that's the weighing that goes on there. And I think the discussion that we have to continue to push is that this preemption is a big deal for us, and local authority is a big deal. And we can't always, we got to make sure that we're always that's up front, and we push as hard as we can in that regard. So I appreciate the conversation. I think if the mayor was here and some other council members here, there might be a little bit more discussion here, but I think we need to continue to have this discussion. I think a league's role of making sure that we are like following our guideposts and making sure that the cities, they have the league's back, but we also understand each other's position on this.
I think without the phrase or something like without their consent will put us in an untenable position in the future that will make us have to oppose things that in the end, we're gonna get beat up even worse for. Now, I'm not saying we need to always consent, but I learned a lot watching how Salt Lake went through these two bills. And I think the approach that was had on the hockey one, and I don't know any of the details, so I'll leave you guys as the experts to speak on this, but you hit on the 12-page hockey bill and the baseball bill being so much more. Maybe our without their consent focuses more to the timing, that these bills need to be done not in the pressure cooker of the last 2 weeks, you know, and with us from the very beginning. We want to play. You know, Spanish Fork joined the Inland Port this last year, and we joined the Inland Port because of, as we measured the different things, the tools that it brought outweighed some of the tools that we felt like we had otherwise. And so it was a very wanting thing. Really well so far, thank you. But, you know, we did that knowing the lay of the land, and it was a very conscientious choice. Totally different than the original Salt Lake City circumstance, right? And so maybe that without their consent is something that we can word in a way that says, we welcome these opportunities. Bring us in from the beginning, yesterday, outside of the session, you know, and let us go along with you. We want the same things that you want. So let us be at the table from the beginning.
So when we originally, what I remember about talking about that without our consent language is we didn't want to be in a position where we would have to oppose every kind of preemption, because there were some things where it actually might make it easier for us to get a good policy result through a statewide policy. But the consent, I mean, I think we all envisioned when it said without our consent, that that's a freely given consent. It's not a gun to your head, like lesser of two evils kind of consent. And frequently that is what we are faced with. And that's unavoidable just because that's life. You know, you frequently have to make a choice between the lesser of two evils. But I think that language is still valuable for the reason that we don't want to be in a box where we can't, like in Spanish Fork's case, they made a determination, rational determination to participate, right? And that's consent, right? So I think you leave it in, but I think we could clarify it some way. But I don't know that we need to do that, as long as we have the understanding that the consent means freely given consent.
Well, this is a good starting point for the discussion and later this spring, because we do anticipate this tool to continue to come up. And there may only be one Major League Baseball team or stadium in Utah, but there could be other ways that the legislature looks to use this tool that'll be more broadly applicable. And even the case, and part of the reason why we ultimately submitted this veto letter is 23 cities now are faced with the district potentially interfering with their interlocal agreement that could have fiscal impacts on their residents. So that's not just one city with already a state fair park and Major League Baseball. Like, this is Oak City that's going to have a really tough situation to face. So stay tuned. We anticipate both of those issues having specific dialogue there. And then, you know, we need to think through strategically on how do we have this conversation with legislators and make sure we stay at the table, but without the proverbial baseball bat, right? Like, So Mayor Silvestrini, and then there's one other question we wanted to ask the group.
Well, I just want to know whether whether the governor's office ever engages in any dialogue on this or any follow-up, or is it just Sphinx-like until, you get a veto letter or you don't? I mean, do we have any indication about whether what we've submitted is persuasive or whether we should do more?
I talked to the governor's staff this morning to just check in, because last week we had a lot of electronic communication because we were all scattered to the winds at National League of Cities. And they told me they had read all of the city letters. They were reviewing all of them with the governor today, and then they would get back to us. They recognized our concern about the district piece and the trend. And that's where I pointed out to them that we lived some of these lessons back in 2018 with the initial version of the Inland Port Bill versus what the Inland Port model looks like today. Because Seth, if it's okay, I want to put a couple words in your mouth. When Spanish Fork 6 years ago, I voluntarily joined the Inland.
Not even close.
Okay.
Yeah.
I figured it was a safe statement to put in your mouth, but you're really interested in doing it today because it's more collaborative and it's more of a partnership. So, and that was in large part because of the intervention of then Governor Herbert and Lieutenant Governor Cox in the interim work after the initial bill passed. So I think there's a path for that in both of these cases. And then big picture, what's our role, what's our lane for the time the next one of these comes. The other question we wanted to ask today, and recognizing Mayor Kaufusi that we are past our allotted time, consider this a homework assignment. We will be gathering in St. George, in sunny St. George, right, Mayor Randall? You promised in DC, you promised to have beautiful weather. But we'll be gathering in sunny St. George at the April meeting. We always break up into small groups as a board to talk about different issues. So we'll be reporting back to you what you guys directed us last year. So I think we've made some really good progress from some of those small group discussions, and then talk about what can we do better in the advocacy and engagement spaces, and the district piece is part of that conversation. Then the day after, we'll have 500-ish city officials. Katie says we are on pace for last year's numbers, and last year's numbers was a record-setting mid-year conference. We're going to ride at that same pace this year, which is super exciting. But then we'll break into caucuses, and we know that the caucus discussions have been hit and miss. Sometimes they've been terrific, sometimes they've been a struggle. I had a great conversation with Councilmember Egbert last year after mid-year, where Jessica, maybe you remember this, but you were giving me some really good advice on what we could do better, but I didn't write it down. So I'm hoping that you can remember it now, but our homework request is this. Between now and mid-April, please send us text, email, call, ideas of what you think caucuses should try to accomplish this spring. Do we need to make them smaller? Do you as board members want to steer the discussion rather than like staff? Do you want to focus on specific topics? We've taken different approaches at different times. And one of the success stories from caucuses last year was transit innovation grants. That came out of a combination of the Big City Caucus and the Rapid Growth Caucus saying, we want more transit service. What if we did this? What if we did this? And then we as league staff pulled those ideas together, created the transit innovation grant concept that now is in state law. So please be candid with us and just shoot us a message by the end of the month, so the end of March, and we'll put this in our follow-up email to you. Of what can we do to make caucuses as efficient as possible? And what do you think success would look like in caucuses in April? Because that's really our best chance to get feedback. Likewise, we are underway with our spring training. We're doing a lot of outreach to the members. We're going to comms, we're going to city manager groups, there's city manager association, etc. What do you want to hear from your fellow city leaders? What do you want to learn so that come May, when you're prioritizing policy and finishing our budget, you feel like you've heard enough from your colleagues that yes, this is the most important things for city leaders. So that's your homework assignment, to respond back to us by the end of the month, and then we'll follow up these conversations in April and in May. Any questions for us about those homework assignments? Okay. That'll be part of the follow-up email that'll go out by tomorrow. So thank you for that. Thank you for the tremendous discussion today on the Dignity Index, and on the advocacy piece, Mayor Kafusi, my executive director report is, we had over 100 Utahns at NLC, which was awesome. Congrats on the new grandbaby.
Thank you.
There, and
He's still in NICU, but he's just a cutie.
awesome. I mentioned mid-year already, and we've circulated the membership dues with a letter from Mayor Kafusi and me, and then we are putting together our year-end report that will go to the mid-year conference attendees and be mailed out to folks later this spring as well. So the last thing from a National League of Cities perspective, when I talk to those fellow executive directors and hear about battles in other states, we had several state leagues who told us that they lost on legislation this year that now allows for builders to pick their own inspectors.
Oh, yeah.
And we said, well, we didn't lose. And they said, well, how did you guys hold off that momentum? And then,
Videos.
yeah. So we will.
Yeah.
They were persuasive video.
Yeah, so the point is, these meetings always make us feel much better about how we're doing here. And thank you to the folks who are in Washington, DC. And I'll be meeting with all the Western League directors in early April to do debriefs about our legislative sessions on land use, housing, taxes, and everything else. And we'll report back on that soon. But thank you for your support of league staff so that we have the budget capacity to have league staff engage with other state leagues around the country. And thanks for your time today. And Mayor Kafusi, we started 7 minutes late. We're ending 8 minutes late. So I'm only 1 minute.
Yeah, there's one thing that happened at NLC that was actually super cool. So like about 100 people from Utah cities there, and we got a tour of the Capitol by all 4 of our congressional representatives. They broke up people either by district or whoever you wanted to go with. We got to go around with them to see the Capitol. I actually was able to get because they intersected in the rotunda all the time with 3 different ones, and it was very great that they engaged with us that way. And it was awesome to have conversations with our Congress representatives while you're walking around, looking at the Capitol about things that would just spurred conversation. It was pretty productive.
Awesome. Yeah, we experimented doing it that way instead of the town hall style, and yeah, rave reviews from folks. So hoping we can keep doing that.
Just maybe a thought, Cameron, as the session's ended and I know a little bit of what all of the staff did. Just a very hearty congratulations to all of you for the efforts that you did and how you went about doing what you did. I think it's important what we were able to accomplish, but probably just as maybe more important is how you went about doing it and the approaches that you had with all of us as a board, with all of our membership, as well as all of the legislative staff. I thought this year, probably in part because this is my first year being, kind of behind the curtains as much as I was, but just really impressed with how you went about doing what you did. So to all the staff, thank you and congratulations.
Thank you. It was a team effort, and
I second that. You did it better. You disagreed better all the way along. And lastly, if you want to see the new open space created by the private inspectors, I'm happy to give you a tour.
What about, those piling?
Beautiful open space.
Carlo, like the tour to the public and is walking around that open space now.
And they're mostly cleaned up now.
Okay, everybody, I'm just going to announce that our next meeting will be Wednesday, April 17th at 2 o'clock, and this will be down at our convention. So we look forward to seeing everybody down there. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor, say aye.
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 thanks everybody.
Thank
See you
you,
in St.
everybody.
George. Great. Well, thank you everybody for being here. God, if you're coming out your way out. Seth, sorry.
Okay.
Good trip.
Friday. I'm hoping.
Email.